is the largest weapon in the U.S. arsenal. A tactical force with global reach, a commanding presence, and it is armed to the teeth. But without the 6,000 highly trained sailors on board, this ship is dead in the water. Day and night, in the harshest conditions, these dedicated men and women tackle jobs in one of the most dangerous work environments in the world. On this warship, there are jobs where a few inches or the slightest distraction can mean the difference between a good day at work and a disaster at sea. These are the toughest carrier jobs. The Navy's aircraft carriers are the nation's weapon of choice when responding to a global crisis. And the beating heart of this floating combat airport are the brave men and women who perform the most challenging, intense, and dangerous jobs. In just 2005 alone, the Navy lost 16 aircraft and 35 sailors were killed in the line of duty. Every job on the carrier is important, but some of them tip the scales when it comes to personal danger. And if anyone should fail at their job, the aftershock could be felt around the ship. Before air operations can even start on a carrier, there's one tough job that leads the charge. The carrier's helicopters are the first to take off and the last to land during flight operations. The helos can hunt down submarines, take out enemy ships, and deliver special operations units. But their primary role during flight ops is to man up with rescue swimmers. The SH-60s are the eye in the sky, ready to strike if anything goes wrong.
Helicopters are necessary for safe operations of a carrier air wing. Flight decks are very, very dangerous and difficult places, and occasionally you have to eject. When you go into the water, it's the helo pilots and their crewmen who come and fish you out.
The tough job of flying a helicopter from a carrier comes with a unique set of challenges and dangers. Regardless of weather conditions or time of day, the helos must stay in lockstep with the carrier.
Helicopter flying in many ways is some of the most challenging flying you'll do around a battle group, because it's like flying a police helicopter in the middle of a regional airport, except imagine that compressed down to just 4.5 acres.
While the takeoff isn't as bone-jarring and dangerous for a helo, their tough job gets kicked up a notch during search and rescue missions.
You're frequently operating at the absolute edge of your fuel capacity. It never seems to fail that you finally find out the position of the down flyer or the injured crewman who's fallen overboard, and it's right at the ragged edge.
And if the unexpected were to happen, the rotor aircraft has a distinct disadvantage.
Helicopter crashes are really nasty things because you don't have an ejection seat, and what's going to happen is you're going to have a heavy impact, then you're going to have blades impacting, and you're going to be shedding rotors, all of which could cut you in half, and then you're going to sink.
One lurking danger for helicopter pilots is a hydraulic leak. It doesn't take much for this flammable substance to catch fire, and when it does, it can be a multi-million-dollar mishap. A carrier's helo squadron is the guardian angel for every pilot and flight deck crew member. If someone hits the water, the search and rescue swimmers in the helicopters are in charge of finding them and bringing them back alive.
Getting someone who has gone overboard is extremely time critical under all circumstances. If it's someone from the flight deck who's been blown overboard, they've suffered a 90-foot drop or more. You're talking maybe 5 minutes before the cold is so intense, even with your immersion suit, you lose control of your digits and limbs. So the faster they get someone out of the water, the better.
The tough job isn't finished there. the pilot still has the daunting task of sticking a 20,000-pound helicopter on a moving target that can rise and fall dramatically and without warning.
You've got a pitching deck, a heaving deck, you may have weather, you certainly have wind in the face. You may also have jet blasts from planes being launched off the front of the boat.
Flying on the razor's edge is all in a day's work for these pilots.
Whether it's a deck guy who's fallen overboard, whether it's someone who's ejected, people in this business are fanatical about saving other people.
But to keep the carrier's helos and fighting force in the sky, one group of sailors has the tough job of feeding all the machines. They must combat the lethal flight deck to deliver the one substance that keeps everything moving. Above all else, an aircraft carrier is a mobile combat airport. It's designed to inject the Navy's best into the skies above hostile territories in a moment's notice. But without one vital resource, all combat operations would be stopped dead in their tracks. Known as grapes, the men and women wearing purple shirts are the carrier's fuel technicians. This tough job requires them to maneuver through a swarming 4.5-acre flight deck to deliver the 200,000 plus gallons of JP5 jet fuel the carrier needs each day to keep aircraft, forklifts, and dollies loaded and ready for action.
When you're running flight ops, the sound, if you do not have a cranial on, your ears are going to bleed. All you smell is straight jet exhaust, and you always got to stay vigilant, because if you do not pay attention where you're going, at the wrong place at the wrong time, something very bad could happen.
But during the heat of combat, the grapes don't have the luxury of pulling an aircraft aside for refueling. In an operation called hot pumping, the fuel technicians navigate the unforgiving flight deck in close contact with live ordnance and launching and landing aircraft to deliver the lifeblood of the air wing.
During combat ops, we have to get the birds off the deck quick, so we don't have time to shut down the birds. So you have to be really careful when you hot pump. You have to make sure the certain engine is shut down, because if some fuel came out, then something bad could happen with that.
When combat ops hit full swing, these guys are clocking 18 to 20-hour shifts, but there's no room for fatigue.
The most dangerous part of our job is being out there on the foul line, which is where when the bird lands, the resting hook comes down and catches the wire, and the wire stretches out. And it makes that thick wire look like a rubber band. And if that wire snaps, that's probably like 5 feet away from me. If it snaps, then it's disastrous.
The flight deck exposes all the colored shirts to dangerous conditions that can easily slip into chaos. January 2005, USS Kitty Hawk is off the coast of Japan. An F-18 Super Hornet catches the third wire, but it snaps, sending the fighter over the front of the ship. Meanwhile, the arresting cable recoils through one sailor's leg and injures 5 others. But the job and the danger don't stop on the flight deck. Getting the jet fuel to the aircraft is only half the battle. What many people don't know is that in the bowels of the ship lives a complete fuel laboratory.
Getting into this job, I was amazed to learn at the process that we go through to make sure that the fuel is clean. It goes through a series of tanks and filters and a centrifuge, which actually spins the fuel to remove sediment and water.
In this highly flammable environment, one spark, one false move, one sleight of hand could mean a mass casualty explosion. Here, 40 feet below the waterline, the grapes test over 200 samples of fuel every day to make sure the jet fuel meets Navy standards.
These aircraft engines are are very highly tuned, and they provide a tremendous amount of thrust from a very small package. And so the quality of the fuel is really important, because when it comes through the fuel system, you want to make sure the fuel system doesn't clog, and you want to make sure that you're extracting every little bit of energy from that fuel, because it sprays out like an atomizer into the combustion chamber, and you want to make sure that you're burning fuel and not spraying something like water. We go through a pretty detailed process to make sure that that fuel is purified for operating these very, very finely tuned and expensive, I might add, aircraft engines.
From the center of the flight deck's hornet's nest to the belly of the ship, the grapes are constantly pushing the safety envelope to keep this combat airport ready to roll. And there's a lot of pride in a job well done.
You know that what you're doing is for a cause, and you gotta get that bird fueled quick so it can go out there, and no matter how many seconds you use, it could save someone's life.
Up next, when a ship can tear through its supply of 3 million gallons of fuel in a matter of days, the carrier has to turn to the bosun's mates for a risky exercise at sea to resupply. It's a mammoth task to keep a floating city and a fighting force of 6,000 men and women armed and ready for action. In order to sustain long deployments at sea, a carrier must be resupplied as often as once a week. This allows the ship to maintain its presence in volatile areas of the world where friendly ports are not available. The replenishment at sea mission is often accomplished by a risky high wire act called a CONREP, or connected replenishment.
Without question, one of the things that makes the United States Navy a great Navy is our ability to conduct underway replenishment.
We'll be connected by span wires or high lines, and we'll begin to transfer gas, fuel, and supplies between each other. It's critical to the ship's mission so that we can stay out at sea for extended periods of time, refuel our jets, and keep our sailors fed.
A 2005 report found that the deck department has the highest rate of injuries on the aircraft carrier. This tough job calls on two sets of sailors, the ship's helmsman to steer the carrier, and the bosun's mates of the deck department to bring on the supplies.
Come left, steady course 110, aye, sir.
The high-intensity exchange may look relatively straightforward, but this is NASCAR on the high seas. The ship's drivers bring the boats together with only a slim separation of 160 feet. It's like steering the Empire State Building up alongside the Washington Monument and holding that position for upwards of 6 hours. Steaming at 12 to 14 knots, it takes nerves of steel to maintain an absolutely perfect course. If the ship were to veer just 1 degree, it could mean disaster for the $5 billion carrier and its supply ship.
It's a very dangerous evolution. We have the hazards of steering casualties or rudder casualties. For those reasons, we have safety officers in place at each station. A collision is a huge threat to a ship. Everybody has to keep their head on a swivel at all times.
But this dangerous job hits the fast lane and accelerates when high-tension wires are brought into place across a gulf of turbulent water.
Station 11, go control.
The bosun's mates from the ship's deck department are called into action in the hangar bay to put the wires in place and start the transfer of supplies. The steel cables can support loads up to 8,750 pounds.
There's multiple things that can go wrong. Lines in the water could pull lines out of line handlers' hands, causing hand injuries. Trip hazards, the lifelines are down, you could risk someone falling overboard. We're dealing with tensioned lines, tensioned by thousands of pounds that could run the risk of breaking. We also have fuel. We're pumping thousands of gallons of fuel. If the rig comes disconnected, you could potentially have fuel all over the deck, on personnel, in their eyes, causing personnel hazards.
If the ships deviate just 20 feet from their set course, they could cause the high-tension wires to snap at a rate quick enough to kill anyone in their crosshairs.
When we're taking on supplies, it can be a little crazy, especially with all the trip hazards and wires and line handling going on. And then also when we're hooked up and we're tensioned and the supply ship is sending over cargo, sometimes they get a little wild with the controls and they'll come over too fast and slam into our equipment. But all in all, it's a lot of fun.
Connected replenishment out in the open ocean is a high-stakes game that requires grueling concentration and dynamic teamwork between the ship drivers and bosun's mates of the deck division. All so that the carrier can launch into action when duty calls.
The best part of Conrep is just the satisfaction of knowing that I brought on the fuel that keeps our jets in the air, or brought on the mail and the food that keeps the crew spirits up.
But one of the ship's vital supplies, brought on during replenishment, comes with an extra element of danger. The carrier's firepower can only be handled by one extensively trained group of sailors. This 97,000-ton mobile combat airport has the capability of launching more than 100 sorties a day during the heat of battle.
Roger, RTB 0106.
And when these fighter jets catapult into enemy territory, it's vital that they pack potent firepower. Getting all the explosive ordnance onto the jets is one of the toughest jobs on a carrier. It falls on the shoulders of a select group of sailors that make sure the aircraft are loaded down with weaponry. The aviation ordnance men, also known as the Red Shirts.
One of the things that we say a lot is that our publications were written in blood because people learned the hard way. And it's a trial and error process for sure.
Red Shirts are in charge of making sure that anything that gets dropped, launched, or fired from an attack aircraft is put in place quickly and safely.
The range of ordnance that we actually carry out there is pretty wide. We have a 20mm cannon in the nose that we can load. We can carry AIM-9 Sidewinders, GPS-guided bombs, laser-guided bombs. Plus, on top of that, you've got air-to-ground missiles. So it's a little bit of everything out there.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, go!
It all starts 5 decks below the waterline in the ship's ordnance magazines. Red Shirts need just over a minute to prep a bomb with an aerodynamic fin and nose plug. A special elevator lifts the ordnance to another team of Red Shirts working on the flight deck. Once a piece of ordnance is on the flight deck, the job of the Red Shirt gets tougher. Working conditions on the flight deck require Red Shirts to concentrate not only on their job, but also on what's happening around them.
As soon as you get out of there with your 8 to 10 foot long trailer with 1,500 pounds worth of bombs on it, you're immediately dodging propellers, helos, jet blasts, trying to keep from running people over, doing whatever you can to get the ordnance to the jet as fast as you can. So it's definitely an obstacle course. I've seen a lot of people get hurt because they wouldn't get out of our way, and you don't stop 1,500 pounds real quick.
There are no shortcuts in this job. Most of the time, Red Shirts load ordnance onto an aircraft with sheer muscle.
Pretty much anything below 1,000 pounds, we'll lift ourselves, just straight human power. We do have some tools that help us. We call them the hernia bars. When we're doing it ourselves, it's up to us to get it up there. And if something fails, it's one of us that's failing. So once we get up there, there are visual indications on the bomb rack that show us that the hooks have locked. Other than that, give it a good old shake and it's usually good.
But sometimes it's the unexpected that gets people in trouble.
I've seen guys get their heads stuck between the hernia bar and a pylon, and then you gotta take the bomb back down so they can get their cranial out of there. A lot of people get in a rush and they're not paying attention, and one minor step that gets missed could cause an explosive mishap, and that's why there's so many redundancies built into what we do.
Combat operations often require the stealth of darkness. To hide the ship's position at night, most lights are turned off and the danger intensifies.
Once the sun goes down, things can get interesting. What we end up running into is the other people that aren't paying attention or don't see us coming when we're getting the ordnance up to the jets. We'll end up not seeing fuel hoses, and then we run into them. It's the stuff that you can't see.
On the USS Abraham Lincoln, an F-14 crashes and is engulfed in flames. One bomb is too close to the fire, so the red shirts work quickly to remove the entire mount, with the bomb still attached, and whisk it from the scene. But with great risk comes great reward for those that handle the carrier's ordnance.
Navy's a really tight group. Without any one job, you know, ultimately the mission's not going to be successful. But without ordnance, you know, there is no mission. That's one of the satisfying things to me, is knowing that not only am I giving this pilot a purpose in life, but I'm also loading some of the stuff that's going to make sure he gets home safe too.
Once the aircraft are armed and ready for battle, it's go time. Up next, another full-throttle job that puts sailors just inches from launching and landing aircraft. This air base at sea allows U.S. fighting forces to bring the fight to the enemy's front lines. And this combat airport is driven by a wide variety of highly trained sailors. But there's one group that works closest to the aircraft at the most critical and dangerous moments of flight operations. They are the green shirts, and they operate the mechanisms that make shipboard flight possible: the steam catapults and the high-tension steel arresting wires.
The green shirts are the final safety and quality check before that airplane is launched. They're the last chance for that pilot who's sitting there in the ejection seat to make a safe takeoff. And if they don't do their job, they're the people who are going to go ahead and suffer the consequences along with the pilot.
When the aircraft is in position, the green shirts are responsible for attaching the nose gear to the shuttle of the steam-powered catapult, all while standing just inches away from spinning prop blades and deadly jet engine intakes.
First time I came up here, I stood next to a EA-6B Prowler when it took off, and my nose started bleeding because of how loud it was. And it just started vibrating. You can feel it in your chest, you can feel it everywhere. It's so loud up there. You are running under tail hooks, you are dodging wings, and it's ridiculous to see how much you can realize and react to in a short time.
It's a tough job for the hookup man. This green shirt crawls beneath the aircraft to ensure that the launch bar and holdback bar are properly attached to the shuttle. Once the aircraft is locked in place, the danger remains for the green shirt. 2006, on board the USS Carl Vinson, a sailor learns that just 1 foot can make a big difference. As the sailor stands up, the suction of the engine rips the cranial from his head. After a successful hookup, the catapult shoots the bird to 165 miles an hour in just 2 seconds. But there's no time to stop and rest. The aircraft is barely in the air when green shirts are already back in the line of fire, moving on to the next launch.
Usually from one plane hitting the deck to the next hitting the deck is about 35 seconds to a minute.
But handling aircraft during launch is only half of what makes the job of a green shirt so tough. When those same aircraft return to the ship, green shirts are in charge of wrangling the carrier's arresting cables. When a landing aircraft catches one, the cable unwinds and stretches out across the flight deck. And when it recoils into place, it happens fast.
The cable, you can't bend it with your hand. It feels like a steel bar. But when it's moving this fast, it can take your legs right out from under you. It bends and kind of looks soft, but it hurts.
It's the year 2000. A maintenance crew crosses the deck during flight ops. Everything looks normal until a crew member gets too close to an arresting wire as it snaps back into place. It only takes seconds for things to go wrong, and this sailor learns his lesson as the shipmates help him up and out of the danger of landing aircraft.
Nervousness is basically a requirement up here. You gotta always have a fear and a respect for the aircraft moving around you. Aircraft's coming at you around 200 miles an hour, and if you're comfortable with that, something's wrong. And it's just a constant respect for everything that's going around you, or else you're gonna make a mistake and it's not forgiving.
But the biggest danger from these cables comes when one of them breaks. Though rare, the recoiling force released by a cable with its weight and mass is enough to seriously injure anyone in its path.
Let's face it, you've got seals, you've got wires. It's not a question of whether a catapult or an arresting wire is going to break, it's a question of when. The green shirts who operate back there, they have got a lot of challenges, and in many ways, it's maybe the most dangerous place on the flight deck.
Green shirts put themselves on the line, day in and day out, to make sure the aircraft are launched and recovered safely. But this tactical ballet requires another group of individuals who are the last line of defense for pilots trying to get back on board the carrier. When the carrier squadrons return from their mission, the airspace above the ship becomes a hornet's nest of activity. And the landing signal officers, called LSOs for short, have front row seats to all of the action.
You probably heard that landing on an aircraft carrier is much like a controlled crash, and that's for a reason, because we want to land very precisely right on a particular spot, and the LSOs are really central to ensuring that that happens consistently and safely.
Landing signal officers are themselves experienced pilots, and they have the tough job of guiding the pilot in their last seconds before they hit their target, the carrier runway. The landing area is only 75 feet wide, and it moves at the mercy of the sea, forcing pilots to stick a 50,000-pound aircraft onto an impossibly small moving target.
This is our airfield. We can't very easily go to another one. So we want to make sure that we get aboard the first time around and do it safely.
The landing signal officers study the approach of the landing aircraft and have mere seconds to relay critical flight information to the pilot.
You're telling them what the wind is doing, what the deck motion's doing at the time. And if the deck's moving, you're letting them know, hey, the deck's coming up, and letting them know what the winds are and how that adversely affects them.
Even with the LSO's aid, pilots can't let their guard down. October 9th, 2001. On the USS Nimitz, a C-2 Greyhound carrying VIP passengers from a foreign country comes in for landing. It hits turbulence and the pilot overcorrects. The aircraft careens towards the edge of the deck. The only thing that stops it is the catwalk just below the flight deck. Fortunately, all passengers walk away unharmed. The LSOs must also perform last-second checks to make sure the landing area is completely clear.
There's a lot of people on the flight deck that have their backs turned to the airplane. And they have their backs turned because they're doing their job and they're watching a portion of the flight deck and they're basing their safety on you. If you don't do your job, a lot of people could possibly get hurt, and hurt in a bad way.
LSOs are also responsible for making time-critical assessments of each pilot's mental and physical state.
One of the biggest things there is trying to stay focused and being able to convince that pilot and have that pilot convince himself that, you know, the flight's not over after going in country and doing his good work, that he still has to get aboard safely. As the LSO, you have to be able to take that into factor and realize that, hey, you know, who do we have coming aboard, and look at it. Oh, these are the guys that just flew the 4-hour sortie in country. Okay, we really need to be on our toes today to get our bros back on board. And that's one of the things you're out there to do.
Still, with all the training and expertise at the pilot's disposal, landing an aircraft on a carrier is tricky business. And when accidents happen, the LSOs are right in the crosshairs. January 28, 2006. Off the coast of Australia, an F-18 slams into the back of the USS Ronald Reagan. During an emergency situation, LSOs have few options to get themselves out of the way. Their last resort, an escape chute.
You're there about 6 feet away from where aircraft going 141 knots is at. So, you know, if he comes left just a little too much, it could be really bad for you. And then your only option is to jump in the net so that you can get lower than the flight deck.
Once the LSOs assist in bringing the aircraft back safely, they hand the aircraft off to another group of sailors. These sailors charge into the thick of flight deck chaos to keep operations up and running. The tough job of the airplane handler is next. The flight deck of an aircraft carrier is 360 degrees of danger. Turning and burning jets, snaking fuel lines, live ordnance on the move, and jet intakes. And there's one team of sailors that must direct the multi-million-dollar combat aircraft through this melee. These are the aircraft directors, also known as yellow shirts. A report from 2 carrier deployments shows that the largest number of injuries are suffered by the most junior personnel.
This is a really interesting job because most of these are some of the youngest members of the flight deck crew. That kid on a flight deck is moving a $60 million fighter jet under really tough conditions, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour of wind at their back as they're blindly stepping backwards over hoses, wires, cables to get that aircraft into position.
When they're running full throttle, yellow shirts are moving an aircraft to its launch every 30 seconds, while simultaneously parking landing aircraft every 45 seconds.
It gets pretty chaotic moving aircraft, especially when we have an aircraft trying to land and we're trying to park an aircraft at the same time in a different area. And you have to be quick about it, but yet safe at the same time.
The yellow shirts must act quickly to clear the runway before the next aircraft arrives. If they don't, things can go south fast. May 1993. The flight deck isn't cleared in time, and an F-18 strikes an A-6 in a nearly catastrophic mishap.
There is no margin for error out here. You have to constantly be aware of what's going on. You can't be tired at all. If you're tired whatsoever, you need to go down below and try to take a break or something, because if you're not paying attention to what's going on, a wing could hit you, or you could trip over something, or there's so many different hazards up here that you have to be aware of your surroundings.
One of the biggest dangers the yellow shirts deal with is jet blast. This is the thrust that comes from the rear of the jet engines, even when they're at idle. Working in such close proximity to jets that are constantly turning and moving puts yellow shirts right in the line of fire.
You can't see the jet blast, but now when it hits you, it can knock you down and will knock you down. It's like you're cooking. You can't see because your eyes are watering from the heat. You can't breathe because it's so hot.
This tough job requires working in a world of inches. There isn't enough room on the flight deck to park all 80 aircraft. To clear enough space on the deck for flight operations, the yellow shirts actually have to park these $50 million fighter planes over the edge of the ship.
You may think 4.5 acres is a lot of real estate, but the fact of the matter is, packing as many aircraft as you can there is a real art form. You're literally talking about clearances measured in inches.
And without the hard work of the yellow shirts, the next tough job couldn't get off the ground. At the core of the carrier's military mission is the ability to catapult combat aircraft into hostile territories whenever called upon by top military brass. Every time a pilot straps into the cockpit, they know they're pushing the physics of flight. It's a job that requires 2 years and over $1 million of training. Only a select few can call themselves naval aviators.
This is a dangerous business. There was a time, not so many years ago, when your odds of surviving a career as a naval aviator were not good. People who do it well become legendary naval aviators, and people we talk about for generations afterwards.
It all starts with a salute and the infamous catapult shot. The act of flying is challenging. How you get there off a ship is completely unnatural. The pilot has just 300 feet to get their aircraft airborne.
You got to figure the top of the carrier deck is about 60 feet above the water. So from there, you really don't have much of a margin for error if the jet's not really flying away like it's supposed to. You have about a second, to, if not less, to actually start implementing all those controls and make sure the jet's flying away. Or else you're going to end up going into the water, which is obviously not what you want to do.
But the dangers a carrier-based pilot faces don't stop with takeoffs and landings. Naval aviators are often forced to refuel mid-air. This involves flying in tight formation with a tanker and connecting to a hose that drops to the fighter.
Refueling is actually another one of those unnatural things that you really don't want to do. You really don't want to be that close to an aircraft, and if you think about it, you really don't want to be connected to another aircraft in any way, shape, or form. The most stressful part usually of tanking isn't really mission tanking, because where you actually launch, you go get gas, and then you go do your mission. It's when you had that bad night, coming ready to land, you keep boltering, meaning you don't actually trap on the carrier, you keep going around, next thing you know, you need gas, and you're frazzled. You've got 3 shots looking at the deck, you're tired, and now you've got to go join up on the tanker and get gas so you can do it all over again.
Country, Talon 202.
But what goes up must come down, and a carrier landing is one of the most feared aspects of naval aviation.
If you think about when you're trying to land on a carrier, if the carrier is moving, you actually have to land at some place where it's not even there yet. You try not to think too much about it because you don't want to get paralyzed to the point where you're afraid to execute.
A naval aviator is cut from a different cloth. They make the tough job of putting a fast-flying aircraft onto a moving ship again and again without incident look easy. But many things can go wrong in the critical few seconds of landing. October 1989. On the USS Lexington, a 23-year-old, fresh from flight school, is making his first attempt at landing on a carrier. The plane goes into an aerodynamic stall and flips upside down. The pilot and 3 sailors are killed in the accident.
Once the mission's over, now your brain starts thinking, I gotta get back on deck. And then again, rolling out in the groove and getting ready to land, it's about 15 seconds of sheer terror the entire time as you're thinking to yourself, I better do this right or else maybe get injured or die.
Even when a landing seems normal, there's a chance the aircraft won't catch one of the arresting cables. Called a bolter, the pilot needs to assume he'll miss the cables as soon as the wheels touch down and guns his jet to full throttle. This spools the engines up enough to get the pilot back airborne if required.
An unsuccessful landing, well, if you're lucky, it's a bolter, and you get to go around and try it again, and maybe again. And if you can't get aboard the boat, then you get to go to a land base, or you go swimming. Landing on a carrier is the toughest thing we ask any aviator in the world to do.
When things go wrong, naval pilots have to make immediate and tough choices to save lives. An A6 intruder has a catastrophic engine failure on short final. The pilot guns his remaining engine to go around, but it's not enough. He points the aircraft away from the ship to save lives, then ejects. Pilots are trained to operate in every possible environment, but the danger factor gets amplified when they land on a carrier in high seas in the darkness of night.
Darkness at the boat is unlike any other darkness I think people really are used to seeing. A friend of mine used to say it was like the inside of a basketball. I mean, that's how dark it is. It's just dark. So here's this little piece of light and strip that as you're coming down, you're looking at it, you're flying your instruments, you're looking like, where is this thing? And all of a sudden you're looking like, that can't be it. And lo and behold, it is it. And that's all you have to work with.
Naval aviators must go through countless hours of intense training. But even for some of the most experienced pilots, it can all go wrong in the blink of an eye. December 1996. During night operations on the USS Abraham Lincoln, heavy seas caused the deck to pitch up just as an F-18 is landing. The pilot safely ejects onto the flight deck, but the plane is a loss. Pilots are constantly flying on a knife's edge, putting their lives on the line to complete their mission. But for any carrier job to succeed, the ship must be able to fight on when the worst happens. These sailors hold the life of the entire ship and everyone on board in the balance. There is almost nothing scarier than a fire on a ship. Make that a ship with 2 nuclear reactors, millions of gallons of jet fuel, and thousands of tons of ordnance, and the stakes really start to heat up. 2 of the biggest threats to a carrier are fire and flooding. They both have the ability to take down a carrier, so the damage controlman must protect the ship at all costs.
Damage control is one of those things that you don't talk about very often until you need it, but when you need it bad. Most carriers that have been lost to progressive fire. Anytime a damage control crew goes into action, it means there's something bad happening. They're the ones fighting for the life of their ship. It's not just them, it's the entire ship and all their shipmates.
Even the smallest fire can be a huge threat to this massive warship. The highly trained damage controlmen, also known as the flying squad, must be ready for action around the clock. It's their job to insert themselves into the burning spaces to save the ship and the lives of their shipmates.
When a damage control party enters a compartment where something bad is happening, it can be fire, it can be flooding. When its own ammunition, fuel, and such is starting to damage it, it's a fight for life. And it's no less a fight than infantry shooting at each other across a battlefield.
These sailors have the monumental task of covering a 20-story structure that is 1,096 feet long.
To be in the bowels of a ship, potentially 7 stories under the water, with no outlets or any backup team, can be quite hair-raising.
When responding to any shipboard crisis, time is the enemy.
Even when damage control personnel are resting, when they're in their racks, they have to be ready to hit their damage control station in just a matter of 5 to 10 minutes, from literally being asleep to being fully dressed in their ensemble and at their designated station.
And half the battle can be just getting to the emergency.
One of the real problems with damage control on board a ship, particularly firefighting, is just getting to the damaged area, assessing the problem, and then beginning the first response. You're going to be dragging very heavy equipment, hoses, axes, plus you're going to be in your firefighting ensemble, carrying a tank on your back. and it's hard work.
Although the damage controlmen are the nucleus of the fire party, a shipboard fire is so serious that the Navy takes extra precaution.
One of the things that the Navy trains its sailors to do is be a first responder for every other sailor.
But fire isn't the only disaster the flying squad could face out on the open ocean. If a carrier takes on water, minutes can mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure.
As dangerous as taking off and landing of an aircraft carrier is, doing damage control in a flooded compartment is in many ways your worst nightmare. It's cold, you've got spraying lines, you've got busted pipes, you may have hydraulic fluid, you may have steam pipes cracking. In that water may be muck, maybe bodies, and your job is to go and stop the flooding. That's the basic damage control function.
When the unexpected strikes, the damage controlmen and crash and salvage sailors must fly into the face of danger to combat both fire and flood. All to make sure the ship can keep on fighting. Over 6,000 men and women of the Navy call these carriers home 6 months a year. The culinary specialists on board this mammoth ship have the daunting task of cooking up meals under conditions that would make any chef sweat.
A crew is a happy crew and a productive crew because of food more than any other factor. A really great galley on board a carrier can change the entire worldview for a crew.
It's important for the crew of any ship to feel good. For these sailors who fight in open seas and dangerous territories, food needs to do more than taste good. It needs to provide them with the strength and energy to defend freedom.
One of the things that nobody talks about is the fact that those people up on the deck are burning an incredible number of calories every day.
The biggest challenge for these men and women of the galley is the sheer amount of food that has to be produced.
On board a carrier every day, the mess specialists are going and producing 20,000 meals a day. That's 4 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and mid-rats, or mid-watch rations.
The overwhelming task of beginning a day in the galley starts by baking up 300 loaves of bread, scrambling over 2,000 eggs, and grilling 7,000 pounds of meat. But the most impressive part of this job below the deck is the conditions these chefs have to endure in order to give the crew the next best thing to a home-cooked meal.
You have to do it in small spaces, you have to do it in vast quantities.
The biggest differences between working on the flight deck to working in the galley is literally night and day.
Their days are just one after another. They see no difference from Sunday to Monday. For them, I like to call them the Groundhog Day jobs. They just start doing them and they go day after day after day, and they never stop.
The people who are assigned the endless task of providing food hold an immense responsibility to this carrier and the men and women who keep it running.
We ask a lot of the people who go to sea aboard warships, and this is true aboard every nation's warships. As nations, we owe it to these people to give them the best we can offer, even if what we have to offer is 8,000 miles away and kind of on the end of a long logistical shoestring. It's just what we owe them.
Like the other jobs on an aircraft carrier, this one requires long hours, hard work, and determination. What makes it different is that nothing can happen without feeding the crew.
These are the hidden and dull, dreary, sometimes even dangerous jobs aboard a carrier that nobody sees, but have to happen if this city of floating steel that's moving across the world is just going to function on a day-to-day basis.
Culinary specialists are the backbone to the support system on any aircraft carrier. These men and women create the integral human feel that is necessary for the sailors to do their job well.
It's kind of a funny thing that crewmen are more than willing to go ahead and sleep in bunks that are roughly the size of a coffin. They're willing to go and stand in long lines, as long as you feed them good chow every day.